Hello there. Today I'm tasting what is a hugely popular branded wine. This is Blossom Hill's White Zinfandel, and it's the 2022 vintage of that. People think of Zinfandel as a grape variety that produces sort of big, rich, alcoholic, flavoursome, ripe red wine styles. And it's such is this view of Zinfandel that some people believe White Zinfandel is actually a different grape variety. But no, it's simply the same grape variety made intentionally as a rosé. The concept started out as an accident. In 1975, evidently, at the Sutter Home winery, they had a batch of several thousand litres of saignée juice, so pink Zinfandel juice that had been run off to concentrate a red wine. And it didn't ferment through to dry to produce a dry wine. However, when the winemakers tasted it, it was actually quite an enjoyable drink. So they went and spoke to the marketing department, and thus the phrase was coined, White Zinfandel, to try and sell this accidental wine that they had. And this proved incredibly successful. Blossom Hill itself, as a brand, isn't started until 1992. Was owned by Diageo, massive international drinks company, and was administered through one of their subsidiaries, Percy Fox. I think it's worth saying that this is a brand and perhaps a style of wine that works in a few markets, and particularly in the UK, this has been a very popular brand. Very much supported by advertising and very clearly aimed at female drinkers. In fact, there have been press releases that have stated that the label design was aiming to capture more mature female drinkers. Do you agree with that marketing approach or not? Certainly there was a stage in the second decade of the 2000s when Blossom Hill was the second largest wine brand, not this particular wine on its own, but the whole Blossom Hill range was the second largest wine brand in the UK market. And it was worth something in the region of £200 million worth of sales a year. However, in 2016, Diageo decided that strategically it was going to divest itself of its wine portfolio, and in a $600 million deal sold a number of quite high-profile wine brands, including Blossom Hill, to Treasury Estates, the Australian owners of Penfolds, for instance. So, I mean, another internationally based, but slightly more wine-focused company, I guess. Blossom Hill as a brand, a dedicated winery in Paicines, San Benito Appellation, and that was processing fruit from about 700 acres of owned vineyard that had originally belonged to the Almaden vineyards that had been acquired and included in the brand. One of the things Treasury did was to close down this winery to sell it to Delicato, a winery with a production capacity of 4 million cases a year. Now, in the subsequent period, the brand has actually been, is still incredibly popular, but its sales have declined substantially. Whether that's that it's not being supported by advertising in the same way as it was, whether it's that it's not been particularly well targeted, or whether there was a quality difference as a result of the sale of winemaking facilities, etc. I'm not really sure. One of the things we'll see perhaps in terms of looking at the wine. So to make a White Zinfandel, the steps you make are very different to those used to make a red wine. Zinfandel as a variety is fascinating in that it has a broad spectrum of flavours and a wide ripeness window. So at quite low or low-ish alcohol levels, at about sort of 8 or 9, it will have flavours that are of sort of delicate red fruit. So it'll start with a sort of a delicate strawberry note, maybe even before that a touch of rhubarb, coming into strawberry, and as the ripeness increases, you get more of a raspberry note through to red cherry, riper red cherry, black cherry, and sort of really sort of juicy fruit notes, because one of the nice things about Zinfandel is it retains its acidity really well. There's always a nice freshness with a Zinfandel. So this sort of spectrum of flavours means that when a White Zinfandel is made with alcohol level of about 10%, it will have flavours in that early spectrum note there. So there'll be soft red fruit, sort of strawberry, raspberry, those sort of very attractive notes. So the fruit for this is picked early. And Zinfandel quite readily gives up its colour. You don't need a lot of hard work to get colour into a white Zinfandel. So generally, after a short period of full maceration, pre-fermentation, the juice is directly pressed and there's sufficient colour in them. Fermentation will go on at cool temperatures to retain as much of the fresh fruity aromas as possible, because the cooler ferment will ferment slower and there's less sort of almost boiling of delicate perfumes. Sweetness in a wine like this can two ways. Firstly, you could stop fermentation by chilling the wine and then either adding sulfur dioxide or filtering it to prevent re-fermentation. Alternatively, you can blend sweetness back in by adding a concentrated grape must. The two of these will taste very different. Ideally, you want to use a stop fermentation, because within a grape you'll get two sugars. Those are glucose and fructose, and the fructose has a much cleaner taste. During fermentation, yeasts will ferment glucose first. So if you stop fermentation to leave sweetness, the sweetness that's left will mostly be fructose, and that has a lovely clean nature. If you're back blending sweetness with concentrated grape must, what you've got is equal amounts of both glucose and fructose, and somehow the sweetness is a little more cloying. So that's a sign of good quality. My understanding is that Blossom Hill was using stop fermentation to engender the sweetness. White Zinfandel rosés, I don't know if that is still the case. It will be interesting to taste it and see. Finally, once you've achieved all the fresh fruit flavours in the wine, it's a question of retaining it. So you'll block malolactic conversion, prevent the acidity from being softened through the actions of malolactic bacteria. These wines won't be aged for any long period, certainly not in oak, certainly not with the lees for any period. It'll simply be stored in a stainless steel tank until such a time as it's ready to be bottled, in which case it will be bottled and shipped. So let's see what I make of the wine, shall we? Looking at it, it has a reddish pink colour. It's almost a sort of strawberry colour. There are perhaps the slightest starts of an orangey hue to the colour there. Swirling it, there aren't particularly tears sticking to the glass. It's a wine with 10% alcohol. Yes, it has a little sweetness, but it's not particularly viscous. There's just the slightest touch of tears showing there, but not much. Let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas they're ripe primary fruit. They're quite simple. There's a real sort of juicy strawberry and red cherry note. There's almost a sort of a grapey richness as well. So let's taste. Tasting that, it's sweet, it's really quite simple and straightforward. There's an almost slightly tinned strawberry note. There's a sort of a sweet, syrupy nature and a really sort of pure strawberry note with almost a sort of a leafy touch on the end there. The wine's of medium weight. It's actually quite simple. There's a fairly jammy note on the back palate. The alcohol is not particularly noticeable on the palate at all. As I say, it's only 10%, so that's not surprising. The acidity is giving good freshness to this fruit, which is providing passable length. The initial strawberry notes are starting to develop slightly more into raspberry notes. There's sort of a tiny touch of spice there and a little more weight. But yes, the wine is simple. The fruit is an attractive primary fruit. The sweetness has some clean nature, but I'm not necessarily sure that this is entirely derived from a stop fermentation. There may have been some back blending done to adjust it. The sweetness level, I mean, my understanding is that normally these wines have a sweetness of about sort of 30 grams per litre of sugar. That seems in line with this. It might be a tiny touch higher, maybe up to 40. But what does that mean? That means that it's an off-dry, heading towards medium sort of style. While I don't think this is a wine for wine connoisseurs, I think this is a wine that's very approachable for people who just want an enjoyable drink. There's clean primary fruit, there's freshness, there's passable length. And yes, while this is by no means a fine wine, its clean fruit means this is a wine that's not particularly objectionable either. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this tasting of interest. If you've enjoyed it, do press the like button. Do please consider sharing it with any of your friends you might think might be interested. Also, please leave any comments you have in the comment section below. We'd love to hear what you think about this wine, the tastings we're doing, or any other related matters. Do also please consider signing up to follow us on YouTube. It would be fantastic to have your support. But most importantly, I do hope that you'll make some time to come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Thanks again. Bye for now.